Cumberland County 911, what's your emergency?
Yeah, we're at the pond off Cliffdale Road, near the golf course. We found something.
What did you find, sir?
A body. Female. She's inside some kind of drum or barrel.
Can you confirm she's deceased?
Yes, ma'am. She's been in the water for days.
On the morning of January 1, 1986, private divers make a chilling discovery in a shallow pond in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The body of a young woman. Submerged in just 5.5 feet of water. Inside a 55-gallon barrel. As the investigation unfolds, a disturbing pattern emerges. Evidence disappears. Witness statements are ignored. Critical forensic samples are lost. And the barrel itself? It vanishes without a trace. Police would eventually rule her death an accidental drowning. But the evidence tells a very different story. A story of incompetence. Of cover-ups. And of a family's desperate search for truth. This is Cold Case Dossier, file number 001. The Death of Debbie Wolfe. Underscore 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 underscore. Deborah and Wolfe was 28 years old in December of 1985. A dedicated registered nurse at the Fayetteville Veterans Administration Hospital, she was known for her compassion, her professionalism, and her unwavering reliability. Debbie lived alone in a small, secluded cabin on Cliffdale Road, just outside Fayetteville. The cabin sat on several acres of wooded property, accessible by a long, winding driveway. It was quiet. Private. The kind of place where you could hear the wind moving through the pine trees at night. She shared her home with 2 German shepherds, Morgan and Mason. Those dogs were her constant companions, her protectors in that isolated location. Friends and family described Debbie as meticulous. Everything had its place. She was punctual to a fault. If Debbie said she'd be somewhere at 8 in the morning, she was there at 7:55. At work, her colleagues relied on her. She coordinated hospital volunteers, managed schedules, and never once called in sick without notice. Born in 1957, Debbie grew up in North Carolina, the youngest of 3 children. Her father had been a career military man, which instilled in her a sense of discipline and duty from an early age. After graduating high school in 1975, Debbie enrolled in nursing school at Fayetteville Technical Community College. She excelled in her studies, graduating at the top of her class in 1978. Her instructors remembered her as someone who genuinely cared about patient outcomes, not just completing assignments. After graduation, Debbie worked briefly at Cape Fear Valley Medical Center before accepting a position at the VA hospital in 1980. The job suited her perfectly. She felt a deep connection to the veterans she served, many of whom reminded her of her father. By 1985, she'd been promoted to a supervisory role, coordinating the hospital's volunteer program. It was demanding work, requiring her to manage schedules, train new volunteers, and handle interpersonal conflicts. But Debbie thrived in the role. She had a gift for reading people, for knowing who would be reliable and who needed extra support. Outside of work, Debbie lived a quiet life. She enjoyed reading mystery novels, tending to her small garden, and taking long walks with her dogs through the wooded trails near her cabin. She wasn't much for the bar scene or large social gatherings. Instead, she preferred intimate dinners with close friends or quiet evenings at home. Those who knew her described her as warm but reserved. She didn't open up easily, but once you earned her trust, she was fiercely loyal. In December of 1985, Fayetteville was a military town through and through. Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, dominated the area. Soldiers, veterans, and military families made up much of the community. The city had seen its share of crime, but violent attacks on young women in broad daylight were still relatively rare. Debbie felt safe in her cabin, despite its isolation. She had her dogs. She had her routine. She'd lived there for 3 years without incident. The cabin itself was modest but comfortable. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with a stone fireplace. The previous owner had been an elderly man who'd used it as a hunting retreat. When Debbie bought it in 1982, she'd added her own touches: floral curtains, framed photographs of family, a bookshelf crammed with paperbacks. The property was surrounded by thick pine forest on 3 sides, with the driveway providing the only access. The nearest neighbor was over a quarter-mile away. During the day, the isolation felt peaceful. At night, it could feel oppressive. But Debbie never complained. She loved the quiet, the privacy. And she always felt safe with Morgan and Mason by her side. Those German shepherds were more than pets. Morgan, the older of the two, was 8 years old and fiercely protective. He'd been trained as a guard dog before Debbie adopted him from a shelter in 1983. Mason was younger, only 3, and more playful. But he was just as alert, just as loyal. If anyone approached the cabin, the dogs would bark immediately. They were Debbie's early warning system. And in the 3 years she'd lived there, they'd never let her down. But as it turns out, feeling safe and being safe are 2 very different things. December 26, 1985 would be the last day anyone saw Debbie Wolfe alive. Underscore 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 underscore. December 25, Christmas Day. Debbie spends the holiday with her mother, Jenny Wolfe, and other family members at Jenny's home in Fayetteville. It's a typical family gathering: ham, green beans, mashed potatoes, the works. They exchange gifts around the tree in Jenny's living room. Debbie gives her mother a framed photograph of the 2 of them from a recent trip to the coast. Jenny tears up when she opens it. Debbie receives a new sweater and a mystery novel she'd mentioned wanting. They share a meal together, laughing and reminiscing about past holidays. Debbie's older brother, Michael, is there with his wife and 2 young children. Her sister, Karen, drives in from Raleigh with her husband. The house is full of warmth and noise, exactly the kind of Christmas Debbie enjoys. She talks about her plans for the new year. She mentions needing to pick up a few things for the cabin, some firewood, maybe a new rug for the living room. She's thinking about taking a weekend trip in January, maybe to the mountains. There's no indication that anything is wrong. No hint of fear. No mention of feeling threatened or uncomfortable. She doesn't mention any problems at work or any conflicts with anyone. Everything seems perfectly normal. Around 7 in the evening, Debbie says her goodbyes. She hugs her mother, promises to call soon, and heads out to her car. Jenny stands in the doorway, watching as Debbie drives away, the taillights disappearing into the December darkness. It's the last time Jenny will ever see her daughter alive. The next day, December 26th, Debbie arrives at work at the VA hospital as scheduled. Her shift runs from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. She clocks in at 7:58, 2 minutes early, just as she always does. She goes about her duties, reviewing volunteer schedules, meeting with a new volunteer who's starting next week, handling a minor conflict between two staff members. Her coworkers later recall that she seemed completely normal that day. Not stressed. Not distracted. Just Debbie. At noon, she eats lunch in the staff break room with two other nurses. They chat about Christmas, what they did, what gifts they received. Debbie mentions that she's looking forward to a quiet evening at home with her dogs. One of the nurses, Sharon Miller, would later tell investigators that Debbie seemed happy, relaxed. There was nothing to suggest she had any concerns or worries. At 4 p.m., Debbie clocks out. Several co-workers see her leaving the building, walking to her car in the parking lot. She's wearing her work uniform, a long-sleeved white shirt and navy blue pants, the standard attire for hospital staff. She waves goodbye to a security guard she knows. She gets in her vehicle, a tan 1982 Honda Accord, and drives away. That's the last confirmed sighting of Debbie Wolfe by anyone outside her immediate vicinity. Based on the timeline, Debbie would have arrived at her cabin around 4:30 or 4:45 p.m. The drive from the hospital to her home takes approximately 25 minutes. What happened after she arrived home would remain a mystery for years. But the evidence would suggest that sometime between 4:45 p.m. and 10 p.m. that evening, Debbie encountered someone. Someone who would change everything. The next morning, December 27th, Debbie is scheduled to work at 8 a.m. Her supervisor, Linda Hayes, arrives at the hospital at 7:30. She expects to see Debbie already there, as usual, preparing for the day. But Debbie's office is dark. 8 o'clock comes and goes. No Debbie. Linda tries calling her home. The phone rings and rings. No answer. By 8:30, Linda is concerned. This isn't like Debbie. She's never been late, let alone a no-call, no-show. By 9 a.m., genuine alarm sets in. Linda calls Jenny Wolfe, Debbie's mother. Has she heard from Debbie? Is everything all right? Jenny hasn't spoken to her daughter since Christmas Day. When Linda explains the situation, Jenny's stomach drops. Something is wrong. She can feel it. Worried, Jenny enlists the help of Kevin Gorton, a close family friend who lives nearby. Together, they drive to Debbie's cabin. The drive feels longer than usual. Jenny's stomach is in knots. She keeps telling herself there's a logical explanation. Maybe Debbie overslept. Maybe her alarm didn't go off. Maybe her phone is out of order. But deep down, she knows something is wrong. When they arrive at the cabin, the first thing Jenny notices is Debbie's car. It's parked in the driveway, but not in its usual spot. Debbie always parked parallel to the cabin, neatly aligned. But today, the car is at an odd angle, as if someone had parked it hastily. The driver's side door is fully closed, not ajar, but something about the car's position feels wrong. Jenny and Kevin approach the front door. Kevin tries the handle. It's unlocked. That's unusual. Debbie always locked her doors, especially at night. Jenny pushes the door open and calls out. Debbie? Debbie, are you here? Silence. Except for the dogs. Morgan and Mason are barking frantically inside, their claws scratching against the hardwood floor as they rush to greet Jenny and Kevin. The dogs are clearly agitated, their barking more desperate than usual. Jenny and Kevin step into the cabin. What they see stops them cold. The cabin is in complete disarray. This is not how Debbie keeps her home. Empty beer cans are scattered across the kitchen counter. 4. Maybe 5 of them. Jenny recognizes the brand, Budweiser, but here's the thing, Debbie didn't drink beer. She occasionally had a glass of wine, but beer? Never. Jenny has been to this cabin dozens of times. She's never seen beer cans here. She moves through the kitchen, her heart pounding. In the living room, she finds Debbie's work uniform lying on the floor. The long-sleeved white shirt and navy blue pants are crumpled in a heap, as if they'd been tossed aside carelessly. Jenny picks up the shirt. There's a distinctive coffee stain on the left sleeve. She remembers Debbie spilling coffee on herself earlier that week. Debbie had been wearing this uniform when she left work the day before. Why would she just throw it on the floor? That wasn't like her at all. Debbie was meticulous. She always folded her clothes, even dirty ones, before putting them in the laundry basket. Jenny continues searching. In Debbie's bedroom, she finds her purse shoved under the bed. Not placed neatly. Shoved. As if someone had kicked it there. Jenny pulls it out and opens it. Debbie's wallet is still inside. Her ID. Her credit cards. About $40 in cash. Nothing appears to be missing. Kevin checks the rest of the cabin. The bathroom. The back rooms. No sign of Debbie. He opens closets, looks under the bed, checks the small storage area off the kitchen. Nothing. And then there are the dogs. Morgan and Mason haven't been fed. Their food bowls, normally filled by Debbie every morning and evening, are empty. Their water bowls are nearly dry. These dogs were Debbie's babies. She would never leave them like this. Morgan is pacing anxiously, his ears pinned back. Mason keeps running to the back door, whining. Jenny's hands are shaking as she reaches for the phone in the kitchen. She dials 911. The dispatcher answers, and Jenny struggles to keep her voice steady. My daughter is missing. Her car is here, but she's not. Something's wrong. You need to send someone. The dispatcher takes down the address and assures Jenny that officers are on their way. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrive at the scene. Officers David Sinclair and Marie Thompson step out of their vehicles and approach the cabin. Jenny meets them at the door, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She explains the situation. Debbie didn't show up for work, the cabin is in disarray, the dogs haven't been fed. The officers enter the cabin and begin documenting what they see. Officer Sinclair photographs the beer cans on the counter. Officer Thompson notes the discarded uniform in the living room and the purse under the bed. They ask Jenny a series of questions. When did you last see your daughter? Christmas Day. 2 days ago. Did she seem upset or troubled about anything? No. She was happy. Everything was normal. Does your daughter have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her? Jenny shakes her head. Debbie was kind. She helped people. She had no enemies. What about a boyfriend? A romantic interest? Jenny mentions that Debbie had been dating someone casually a few months ago, but it hadn't worked out. Nothing serious. She also mentions Debbie's work at the hospital, coordinating volunteers. Some of those volunteers were a bit odd, she says. A few had made Debbie uncomfortable with unwanted attention. The officers make notes. Officer Sinclair radios for additional units. They decide to bring in bloodhounds to search the surrounding area. Maybe Debbie wandered off into the woods. Maybe she had an accident. The search begins that afternoon. 2 bloodhounds, trained in tracking missing persons, are brought to the scene. The handlers give the dogs articles of Debbie's clothing to sniff, the uniform from the living room floor. The dogs immediately pick up a scent and begin tracking. They move through the cabin, out the back door, and into the woods behind the property. Jenny and Kevin watch anxiously as the handlers disappear into the tree line. An hour passes. Then 2. Finally, the handlers return. The dogs lost the scent about a quarter mile into the woods, one of them explains. It just stopped. Like she got into a vehicle or something. Jenny's heart sinks. Officers Sinclair and Thompson continue searching the property. They check the small shed behind the cabin, nothing but gardening tools and firewood. They examine the area around Debbie's car, looking for signs of a struggle. No blood. No torn clothing. No obvious evidence of violence. As the afternoon turns to evening, more officers arrive. They expand the search to the surrounding roads and trails. They knock on doors at neighboring properties, asking if anyone saw or heard anything unusual on December 26. Most neighbors report nothing. A few mention hearing dogs barking that evening, but that wasn't uncommon in the area. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret Foster, mentions seeing an unfamiliar vehicle parked near the entrance to Debbie's driveway around dusk on the 26th. She can't recall the make or model, only that it was a light-colored Suburban or similar large SUV. Officers make a note of this but don't follow up immediately. As night falls, the search is temporarily suspended. They'll resume in the morning, the officers assure Jenny. Jenny refuses to leave the cabin. She sits in Debbie's living room, surrounded by her daughter's things, Morgan and Mason curled up at her feet. She doesn't sleep. She can't. She keeps replaying the last conversation she had with Debbie, searching for any clue, any hint that something was wrong. But there was nothing. Days pass. December 28th, December 29th, December 30th. No sign of Debbie Wolfe. Police expand their search, but the resources are limited. It's the holiday season. Manpower is stretched thin. Some officers privately begin to suspect that Debbie left voluntarily, that she staged the scene to make it look like foul play. Maybe she had debts. Maybe she wanted to start over somewhere new. But Jenny knows better. Debbie would never do that. She'd never leave her dogs. She'd never abandon her family. By December 31st, Jenny is beside herself with frustration. The police aren't doing enough. They're not moving fast enough. She makes a decision. She hires a private team of divers to search a pond near Debbie's cabin. The pond is part of a golf course property, surrounded by trees and accessible by a walking path. It's about 1.5 miles from Debbie's home. It's shallow. Murky. The kind of place people walk past without giving it a second thought. But Jenny has a feeling. A terrible, gnawing feeling. Maybe it's intuition. Maybe it's desperation. But she can't shake the thought that the pond holds answers. On the morning of January 1, 1986, the private dive team arrives at the pond. Gordon Childress, the lead diver, assembles his equipment while his partner, Tom Weaver, surveys the area. They suit up in their wetsuits and dive gear, despite the frigid January cold. Jenny stands on the shore, arms wrapped around herself, watching. Kevin Gordon is beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Gordon and Tom wade into the water. The surface is dark, almost black, reflecting the gray winter sky. Within moments, they're submerged. And they begin to search. Underscore 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 underscore. The discovery. Gordon Childress is an experienced diver. He's searched ponds, rivers, and lakes for missing persons before, working with law enforcement and private families across North Carolina. Most of the time, these searches turn up nothing. People usually aren't where you think they are. Bodies drift. They get caught in debris. They're carried by currents. But this pond is different. It's small, only about 50 yards across, and the water is relatively still. If there's something here, Gordon will find it. As he descends into the murky water, visibility is poor, maybe 3 feet at best. He sweeps his hands along the bottom, feeling for anything unusual. The pond floor is soft, covered in thick sediment and rotting leaves. It's cold. Silent. Eerie. Tom Weaver is working the opposite side, their search pattern methodical and thorough. 5 minutes pass. Then 10. Gordon is about 30 feet from the shore when his hand touches something solid. Cold metal. He stops, his heart rate spiking. He runs his hand along the surface, smooth, cylindrical. A barrel. A 55-gallon drum. Gordon signals to Tom, who swims over immediately. Together, they examine the object. It's heavy. Much heavier than an empty drum should be. Gordon's stomach tightens. He moves around to the open end of the barrel, his hands exploring. That's when he feels it. Fabric. Cold skin. A body. Gordon immediately signals to the surface team. They need assistance. Now. He surfaces, gasping, and calls out to Jenny and Kevin on the shore. We found something. Jenny's knees buckle. Kevin catches her, holding her upright. Within minutes, Tom and Gordon maneuver the barrel, tilting it carefully to bring it to the surface. It takes both of them, the weight nearly overwhelming. As they tilt it, Gordon sees what's inside. A woman. Pale. Submerged. Wearing a red shirt. He immediately recognizes the clothing from the missing persons report. This is Debbie Wolfe. The divers carefully extract the barrel from the water, guiding it to the edge of the pond. Jenny is standing on the shore, watching. When she sees the barrel, when she sees the divers' faces, she knows. She collapses to her knees, sobbing. Kevin tries to comfort her, but there's nothing he can say. Gordon and Tom pull the barrel onto the muddy bank. It tips slightly, and water pours out. Gordon radios for police immediately. Within 15 minutes, multiple patrol cars arrive, along with an ambulance and a medical examiner's van. The scene is quickly cordoned off with yellow tape. Officers Sinclair and Thompson, the same officers who responded to the cabin, arrive and take charge. They document everything. The barrel. The body. The location. Photographs are taken from every angle. As Debbie's body is carefully removed from the drum, several details immediately stand out to the investigators. Her face is remarkably clean. There's no mud. No algae. No pond scum. In a muddy pond like this, that should be impossible. Gordon Childress would later testify that he found this deeply unusual. When a body has been submerged in murky water for days, it accumulates sediment, especially on exposed skin. But Debbie's face looked as if it had been recently washed. Her eyes are closed. Peaceful. Most drowning victims have their eyes open, mouths agape, faces contorted in panic. It's a reflexive response to the struggle for air. But Debbie looks serene. As if she'd simply fallen asleep. The medical examiner, Dr. Harold Vinson, notes this in his initial observations. He also notes the absence of foam around her nose and mouth, another typical drowning indicator. And then there's her clothing. She's wearing a red shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers. One of those sneakers matches a shoe that had been found floating near the pond days earlier by a jogger who reported it to police. At the time, officers had assumed it was trash, not connected to any case. Now, it's clear the shoe belonged to Debbie. But something about the clothes seems off. The medical examiner can't quite put his finger on it yet, but the fit seems wrong. The body is transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Jenny is escorted away from the scene by family members. She's in shock. Devastated. Her worst fear has been confirmed. But even in her grief, she knows something isn't right. Why was Debbie in a barrel? Where did that barrel come from? And why does her daughter look so clean? As it turns out, these questions would haunt the investigation for decades. The autopsy of Debbie Wolfe is conducted on January 2, 1986, at the Cumberland County Medical Examiner's Office. Dr. Harold Vinson, a seasoned pathologist with over 20 years of experience, performs the examination. He's assisted by a forensic technician and observed by Detective Raymond Fuller from the Fayetteville Police Department. The autopsy begins at 9 a.m. and lasts approximately 4 hours. Dr. Vinson is thorough, documenting every detail, every injury, every anomaly. But what he finds raises more questions than answers. Official cause of death, drowning. Dr. Vinson notes water in Debbie's lungs, which would typically indicate that she was alive when she entered the water. However, the amount of water is minimal. In a typical drowning, the victim inhales large amounts of fluid as they struggle desperately to breathe. The lungs become heavy, waterlogged, filling with pond water, mucus, and biological material. In Debbie's case, there's approximately half a teaspoon of water in her upper airways. That's not enough to cause drowning in most cases. Dr. Vinson makes a note of this but doesn't dwell on it. He attributes the minimal water to what he calls a dry drowning, a phenomenon where the victim's larynx spasms, preventing water from entering the lungs. But dry drownings are rare, accounting for only about 10 to 15% of drowning cases. And they typically occur in specific circumstances, cold water shock, for example. There's no evidence that Debbie experienced such a shock. Second, there's no foam in her airways. When someone drowns, the mixture of water, air, and mucus creates a frothy foam that's found in the nose, mouth, and lungs. It's one of the most reliable indicators of drowning, present in approximately 80 to 90% of cases. Debbie has none. Dr. Vinson notes this absence but again doesn't consider it conclusive. He writes in his report that the foam may have dissipated during the time the body was submerged. But forensic experts would later dispute this. Foam is remarkably persistent, even in bodies that have been in water for days. Third, her face is unmarked by the typical signs of drowning. No petechiae, the tiny burst blood vessels around the eyes and face that occur from the strain of trying to breathe underwater. No bruising or abrasions from thrashing against the sides of the barrel or the pond bottom. No signs of struggle at all. Dr. Vinson does note small abrasions on Debbie's fingers. They're superficial, consistent with defensive wounds. As if she'd tried to fight someone off. The skin on her knuckles is scraped, and there's bruising on the back of her right hand. These injuries are fresh, occurring within hours of her death. But the report doesn't dwell on this detail. Dr. Vinson mentions it in passing and moves on. The examination continues. Dr. Vinson inspects Debbie's body for other injuries. There are no broken bones. No significant trauma to the head or torso. No stab wounds. No gunshot wounds. But there is bruising. On her upper arms, faint fingerprint-shaped bruises suggest she was grabbed forcefully. On her inner thighs, similar bruising indicates possible restraint or struggle. Dr. Vinson documents these findings but does not characterize them as definitive evidence of assault. He notes that bruising can occur post-mortem in bodies submerged in water, as tissues break down and blood pools. But forensic experts would later argue that the pattern and location of Debbie's bruises are consistent with antemortem trauma, injuries sustained while she was alive. Then comes the most disturbing finding. Dr. Vinson performs a sexual assault examination. He collects a vaginal swab, standard protocol in any suspicious death involving a female victim. The swab tests positive for the presence of semen. This is a critical piece of evidence. It suggests that Debbie had been sexually assaulted before her death. Or, at the very least, that she'd had sexual contact with someone shortly before she died. Dr. Vinson notes this in his report. He collects the sample, preserves it in a sterile container, and labels it for storage. In 1986, DNA testing is in its infancy. The technology exists, but it's not widely available to local law enforcement agencies. The sample is preserved for potential future testing, should the technology advance. But here's where things get truly troubling. Despite the presence of semen, despite the defensive wounds on Debbie's fingers, despite the bruising on her arms and thighs, the official ruling is accidental drowning. Dr. Vinson concludes that Debbie somehow fell into the pond, became disoriented, and drowned. The barrel? According to Dr. Vinson's report, there was no barrel. Wait. What? That's right. Despite multiple witnesses seeing the barrel, despite photographs taken at the scene by the private divers, the official autopsy report and subsequent police documentation make no mention of it. When Detective Fuller is asked about this discrepancy, he insists that what the divers saw wasn't a barrel at all. It was Debbie's jacket, inflated with air, creating the illusion of a drum. This explanation defies logic. Gordon Childress and Tom Weaver, both experienced divers, are adamant about what they found. It was a metal drum. We touched it. We felt the cold metal. We maneuvered it out of the water. It was heavy, maybe 80 or 90 pounds. But their testimony is dismissed. The official record states, no barrel. When Jenny Wolfe reads the autopsy report, she's stunned. She was there. She saw the barrel with her own eyes. She demands an explanation from the police department. Detective Fuller meets with her in his office. He's polite but firm. Mrs. Wolfe, I understand this is difficult. But our investigation shows that your daughter's death was a tragic accident. There was no barrel. The divers were mistaken. Jenny doesn't believe this for a second. She returns to the pond the next day, determined to find the barrel herself. She brings Kevin Gorton and her son Michael with her. They search the shoreline, the walking path, the surrounding woods. The barrel is gone. Completely vanished. No one can explain where it went. No one will admit to moving it or disposing of it. It simply disappeared. Jenny contacts the private dive team. Gordon Childress tells her that after they pulled the barrel out of the water, police instructed them to leave it at the scene for official evidence collection. "We assumed they'd take it," Gordon says. "We left it right there on the shore." But police claim they never took possession of any barrel because, according to them, no barrel existed. So where did it go? To this day, the disappearance of the barrel remains one of the most frustrating mysteries of this case. But the barrel isn't the only troubling aspect of the autopsy. Jenny is allowed to view her daughter's body before the funeral, which is scheduled for January 6. The viewing takes place at McLaughlin Funeral Home in Fayetteville. As a mother, Jenny knows her daughter's body intimately. She knows her size, her shape, her clothing preferences. And when she examines the clothing Debbie was wearing when she was found, Jenny's blood runs cold. The pants are too big. At least 2 sizes too large. Debbie was petite, size 4 or 6. These jeans are size 10 or 12. Jenny holds them up, measuring them against her own frame. There's no way these fit Debbie. The red shirt? Not Debbie's. Jenny has never seen it before. She's been to Debbie's cabin dozens of times. She's helped her daughter do laundry, organize her closet. This shirt isn't in Debbie's wardrobe. The bra? 3 sizes too big. Debbie wore a size 34B. The bra she's wearing is a size 38D. Jenny examines the tag, disbelieving. And the shoes? Also too large. Debbie wore a size 7. These sneakers are size 10. Jenny can fit her entire hand inside the shoe alongside Debbie's foot. Someone had redressed Debbie's body. But why? And where was the uniform she'd been wearing when she left work? That long-sleeved white shirt with the coffee stain that was found on the floor of her cabin? That uniform was never recovered. It's not with Debbie's belongings. It's not in the evidence locker. It's simply gone. Jenny brings these inconsistencies to Detective Fuller. She shows him the clothing from the funeral home. She points out the size discrepancies, the unfamiliar shirt, the oversized shoes. Detective Fuller listens patiently. Then he tells her, "Mrs. Wolfe, grief can make us see things that aren't there. These clothes belong to your daughter. They must have." Jenny is furious. These are not Debbie's clothes. But Detective Fuller won't budge. The investigation is closed. The case is resolved. Jenny leaves his office, shaking with anger. She knows what she saw. She knows the truth. But no one will listen. In the days following Debbie's death, the Fayetteville Police Department conducts what they describe as a thorough investigation. But from the start, there are problems. Evidence is mishandled. Witness statements are overlooked. And critical leads are simply ignored. Let's start with the crime scene, Debbie's cabin. Police document the beer cans, the discarded uniform, and the purse under the bed. They take photographs, which later become part of the case file. But they don't dust for fingerprints. Not on the beer cans. Not on the doorknobs. Not on the furniture. They don't collect the beer cans for DNA testing, a technology that, while not as advanced in 1986, was still available for blood typing and forensic analysis. They don't test the uniform for trace evidence, hair, fibers, skin cells. They simply take photographs and leave. The cabin is released back to the family within 48 hours. Any potential evidence that might have remained is now contaminated or lost. Jenny's family members, not knowing any better, begin cleaning the cabin. They wash the floors. They dispose of the beer cans. They launder the sheets. By the time Jenny realizes what's happened, it's too late. The crime scene has been irrevocably compromised. Next, the pond. Police conduct a cursory search of the area but fail to interview nearby residents or potential witnesses systematically. Did anyone see something unusual near the pond on December 26 or 27? Was there a vehicle parked near the walking path? Were there any sounds, shouting, splashing, a car engine? These questions are never asked comprehensively. Officers knock on a few doors, take a few statements, and move on. One witness, Carol Jenkins, who would come forward years later, reported seeing a light-colored Suburban near the pond on the evening of December 26. But in 1986, she wasn't interviewed because police didn't canvass her street. She lived just 1 block away from the pond access point. Another potential witness, a teenager named Marcus Williams, was walking home from a friend's house around 9 p.m. on December 26. He cut through the woods near the pond and heard what sounded like someone crying. He didn't investigate, it was dark, and he was alone. But he remembered it later, after Debbie's body was found. He tried to report it to police, but when he called the tip line, he was told an officer would contact him. No one ever did. His name was never entered into the case file. And then there's the matter of Debbie's personal life. Jenny Wolfe tells investigators that Debbie had been dealing with unwanted attention from some of the hospital volunteers she coordinated. One volunteer in particular had been persistent. We'll call him Volunteer A, though Jenny knows his real name. He'd asked Debbie out multiple times. She'd politely declined each time. He'd somehow obtained her home phone number and called her at the cabin. Late at night. Early in the morning. Debbie had mentioned to her mother that this man made her uncomfortable. He had a history of psychiatric issues. Jenny didn't know the details, but Debbie had mentioned it. And he'd made vague threats about showing up at her cabin if she didn't agree to see him. This should have been a red flag. This should have been the first person investigators interviewed. But it wasn't. Police do eventually speak to Volunteer A, but only briefly, and not until January 8, a full week after Debbie's body was discovered. Detective Fuller conducts the interview at the police station. Volunteer A arrives with an attorney, which immediately raises suspicions. The interview lasts less than 30 minutes. Volunteer A claims he was home on the night of December 26, watching television. He lives alone, so there's no one to corroborate his alibi. When asked about his relationship with Debbie, he admits he'd been interested in her romantically. But he insists he accepted her rejection and moved on. When asked about the phone calls to her home, he becomes defensive. I called her a few times. So what? That doesn't make me a murderer. Detective Fuller asks if he'd be willing to take a polygraph test. Volunteer A's attorney interjects immediately. My client will not be taking a polygraph. If you want to question him further, you'll need to provide evidence of wrongdoing. Detective Fuller doesn't push. He thanks Volunteer A for his time and lets him go. Within 2 weeks, Volunteer A moves out of state. He relocates to Virginia, taking a job at a hospital there. No one follows up. No one tracks his whereabouts. He simply disappears from the investigation. There's another volunteer who'd expressed romantic interest in Debbie. We'll call him Volunteer B. Unlike Volunteer A, who was overtly aggressive, Volunteer B was more subtle. He'd befriended Debbie, presenting himself as someone who just wanted to be friends. According to Debbie's co-workers, they'd had coffee together a few times at the hospital cafeteria. Debbie saw it as nothing more than a casual friendship. But Volunteer B wanted more. A few weeks before her death, in early December, he'd asked Debbie if she wanted to take their friendship to the next level. Debbie gently declined, explaining that she valued his friendship but wasn't interested romantically. According to co-workers, Volunteer B seemed to accept this. He didn't make a scene. He didn't become aggressive. But in the days leading up to Debbie's disappearance, his behavior changed. He began asking other staff members about Debbie's schedule. When was she working? When did her shifts end? What days was she off? One nurse, Sharon Miller, found it odd enough to mention it to Debbie. Debbie brushed it off, assuming Volunteer B was just trying to coordinate volunteer schedules. After Debbie's death, police questioned Volunteer B as well. The interview takes place on January 5, 3 days after the autopsy. Volunteer B expresses shock and sadness at Debbie's passing. He describes her as a wonderful person, a dedicated nurse, someone who will be deeply missed. When asked about his whereabouts on December 26, he provides an alibi. He claims he was at a family gathering, his aunt's house in Hope Mills, about 15 miles from Fayetteville. He'd arrived around 5 p.m. and stayed until 11 p.m. His family confirms this, though no one can remember the exact times he'd arrived or left. Detective Fuller accepts his statement and moves on. Volunteer B is never questioned again. He continues working at the VA hospital for another 6 months before transferring to a facility in South Carolina. Like Volunteer A, he simply fades from the investigation. Jenny Wolfe isn't satisfied. She believed that one, or possibly both, of these volunteers knew more than they were saying. She pleads with Detective Fuller to dig deeper. Question them again. Check their alibis more thoroughly. Search their homes. But Detective Fuller is unmoved. Mrs. Wolfe, we've investigated every lead. Your daughter's death was a tragic accident. I know that's hard to accept, but that's what the evidence shows. Jenny doesn't believe him. She can't believe him. Everything about this case screams murder. The beer cans. The missing uniform. The barrel. The wrong clothes. And most damning of all, the semen found during the autopsy. When Jenny learns about this detail, weeks after the fact, she's horrified. Why wasn't this investigated? Why wasn't this considered evidence of sexual assault? Detective Fuller explains that the semen could have come from a consensual partner. Did Debbie have a boyfriend? Someone she was seeing? Jenny tells him that Debbie had been casually dating someone a few months earlier, but they'd broken up in October. Debbie hadn't mentioned seeing anyone since then. Did you ask him? Did you question him? We spoke to him briefly. He has an alibi. What's his name? Detective Fuller refuses to provide the name, citing privacy concerns. Jenny is furious, but there's nothing she can do. She doesn't have the resources to conduct her own investigation. She doesn't have access to the evidence or the case file. All she has is her certainty that her daughter was murdered. And her determination to find out who did it. To understand why Jenny Wolfe was so focused on the hospital volunteers, we need to understand Debbie's role at the VA hospital. Part of Debbie's job was to coordinate and manage volunteers. These were individuals who donated their time to help veterans, assist with hospital programs, and provide support to staff. Most volunteers were wonderful people with genuine intentions. Retirees who wanted to give back. Students fulfilling community service requirements. Veterans themselves, helping their fellow servicemen. But some were problematic. Some had mental health issues. Some had criminal backgrounds that weren't properly screened. And some were there for the wrong reasons: access to vulnerable people, a sense of authority, or inappropriate relationships. Debbie had expressed concerns about the screening process to her supervisor, Linda Hayes. She'd mentioned that some volunteers made her uncomfortable, but she didn't want to cause problems. She was professional. She tried to handle situations diplomatically. One volunteer, Volunteer A, had been with the hospital for several months when he became fixated on Debbie. According to co-workers, Volunteer A would frequently seek Debbie out during his shifts. He'd linger near her office. He'd find excuses to talk to her. He'd offer to help with tasks that didn't require assistance. At first, it seemed harmless. Maybe he was just lonely. Maybe he appreciated having someone to talk to. But over time, his behavior became more aggressive. He asked Debbie out repeatedly. The first time, she politely declined, explaining that she didn't date people from work. He asked again the following week. She declined again. Then again. And again. Each time, Debbie tried to be kind but firm. But Volunteer A wouldn't take no for an answer. He began calling her office, sometimes multiple times a day. Debbie mentioned to friends that she felt uncomfortable, but she didn't want to cause problems by filing a formal complaint. She was afraid it would reflect poorly on her management skills. Then Volunteer A obtained Debbie's home phone number. How he got it, no one knows for certain. Employee phone numbers were supposed to be confidential, not shared with volunteers. But suddenly, Debbie was receiving calls at her cabin. Late at night. Early in the morning. Sometimes he'd just breathe on the line, not saying anything. Other times, he'd plead with her to give him a chance. "I know we'd be good together, Debbie. Why won't you just try?" Debbie finally reported this behavior to her supervisor in mid-December. Linda Hayes took the complaint seriously. She spoke to Volunteer A, telling him to stop contacting Debbie outside of work. She warned him that if his behavior continued, he'd be removed from the volunteer program. Volunteer A didn't take it well. According to one witness, a nurse named Patricia Moore, he became agitated in the hallway after the meeting. He was muttering to himself, loud enough for others to hear. "She's leading me on. She wants this. She's just playing hard to get." Patricia tried to calm him down, but he brushed her off. Then he made a statement that would later take on chilling significance. "If she won't see me here, I'll just have to visit her at home." Patricia reported this to Linda Hayes, who documented it and considered banning Volunteer A from the hospital entirely. But before any action could be taken, the holidays arrived. The hospital was short-staffed. Volunteers were needed more than ever. Linda decided to address the issue after New Year's. But by then, Debbie was dead. Debbie's supervisor, Linda Hayes, mentioned Volunteer A's threat to her mother shortly after the funeral. She told Jenny exactly what he'd said, that he'd visit Debbie at home if she wouldn't see him at work. Jenny immediately brought this information to Detective Fuller. "This is your suspect. This man threatened my daughter." But Detective Fuller was skeptical. "Mrs. Wolfe, people say things they don't mean all the time. That doesn't make him a killer. He threatened to go to her house. And now she's dead. We questioned him. He has an attorney. Without evidence, there's nothing more we can do. Jenny wanted to scream. The evidence was right there, the threat, the obsessive behavior, the phone calls. But Detective Fuller refused to pursue it. Then there was Volunteer B. Unlike Volunteer A, who'd been overtly aggressive, Volunteer B was more subtle in his approach. He'd befriended Debbie, presenting himself as someone who just wanted to be friends. They'd had coffee together a few times in the hospital cafeteria. They'd chatted about books. Debbie loved mystery novels, and Volunteer B claimed to enjoy them as well. Debbie saw it as nothing more than a casual friendship. She'd mentioned him to her mother once or twice, describing him as nice enough, but a little intense. In early December, Volunteer B asked Debbie if she wanted to go to dinner sometime. Not at the hospital. Somewhere nice. Just the two of us. Debbie gently declined. She explained that she valued his friendship but wasn't interested in dating him. Volunteer B seemed to accept this gracefully. He smiled, nodded, and said he understood. But according to co-workers, his demeanor changed after that. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped seeking out Debbie for coffee. But he started watching her. Several staff members noticed him observing Debbie from a distance, across the cafeteria, down the hallway, in the parking lot. One nurse, Sharon Miller, mentioned it to Debbie. "Hey, I don't want to alarm you, but Volunteer B has been watching you a lot lately. Like, staring. It's kind of creepy." Debbie brushed it off. "He's probably just hurt that I turned him down. He'll get over it." But in the days leading up to Debbie's disappearance, Volunteer B's behavior became more concerning. He began asking other staff members about Debbie's schedule. "Does she work tomorrow? What time does her shift end? Is she off this weekend?" When asked why he wanted to know, he'd shrug and say he was just curious. Sharon Miller found it odd enough to mention it to Debbie on December 23, just 3 days before she disappeared. "Debbie, Volunteer B keeps asking about your schedule. It's making me uncomfortable." Debbie sighed. "I'll talk to Linda about it after the holidays." But she never got the chance. After Debbie's death, Sharon immediately thought of Volunteer B. She reported her concerns to Detective Fuller, providing dates and specific examples of his behavior. Detective Fuller interviewed Volunteer B on January 5. The interview was brief, lasting only about 20 minutes. Volunteer B expressed shock and sadness at Debbie's death. He described her as a wonderful person who'd always been kind to him. When asked about his whereabouts on December 26, he provided his alibi, a family gathering in Hope Mills. Detective Fuller called Volunteer B's aunt to confirm. She remembered him being there but couldn't recall exactly when he'd arrived or left. "He was there for dinner," she said. "Maybe from 5 or 6 until 10 or 11. I'm not sure exactly." That was good enough for Detective Fuller. He closed the interview and moved on. Volunteer B was never questioned again. But there was something Detective Fuller never investigated: Volunteer B's vehicle. Volunteer B drove a light-colored Suburban. The same type of vehicle that Carol Jenkins had seen parked near the pond on the evening of December 26. But Detective Fuller never made that connection. Carol's sighting wasn't in the case file yet, she wouldn't come forward for years. And even if it had been, there were dozens of Suburbans in Fayetteville. It would have been nearly impossible to track them all down. Years would pass before new information would surface about these men. Information that would validate Jenny's suspicions. But by then, it would be too late. Let's return to the most baffling piece of evidence in this case, the barrel. Multiple witnesses saw it. Gordon Childress, the private diver who found Debbie's body, has never wavered in his account over nearly 40 years. It was a 55-gallon drum. Dark-colored, possibly blue or black. Made of metal. Cold to the touch. Heavy. Debbie's body was inside it. His partner, Tom Weaver, confirmed this. We both saw it. We both touched it. We maneuvered it together out of the water. There's no question, it was a metal barrel. Kevin Gorton, Jenny's friend who was present at the scene, also saw it. So did several police officers who arrived shortly after the discovery. Officer David Sinclair was one of the first responders. In his initial report, dated January 1, 1986, he wrote, "Victim's body recovered from pond in metal container, approximately 55 gallons in size." But when the official police report was filed days later, all mention of the barrel had been removed. The report stated that Debbie's body was found floating in the pond, kept afloat by her jacket, which had filled with air. This explanation makes no sense for several reasons. First, if Debbie's jacket was filled with air, her body would have been floating on the surface, not submerged at the bottom in 5.5 feet of water. Bodies that float due to trapped air remain on the surface, visible from the shore. Gordon Childress found Debbie's body at the bottom of the pond, 30 feet from shore. Second, the divers specifically described a metal drum. They touched it. They felt the cold, smooth surface. They maneuvered it, tilting it to bring it to the surface. A jacket, even one filled with air, feels nothing like cold metal. The texture is completely different. Gordon would later say, "I've been diving for 20 years. I know the difference between fabric and metal." This was a barrel. Third, there are the drag marks on the bottom of the pond. Gordon noticed them immediately when he first descended. The sediment on the pond floor had been disturbed recently, creating visible tracks. Something heavy had been dragged across the bottom, leaving parallel grooves in the mud. What created those marks if not a heavy object, like a barrel, being dragged into position? Fourth, there are the photographs. Gordon Childress took several photographs at the scene with his waterproof camera. In those photos, clearly visible, is a dark blue or black metal drum lying on its side on the shore of the pond. Water is pouring out of it. Debbie's body is partially visible inside. Those photographs were turned over to police as part of the evidence collection. But when Jenny Wolfe requested copies of the case file years later, the photographs were missing. According to police, the photographs were misplaced during evidence transfer. Gordon still has copies of those photos. He's kept them for nearly 40 years, knowing they're the only proof that the barrel existed. In interviews, he's described feeling frustrated and bewildered by the police's refusal to acknowledge the barrel. They keep saying it was her jacket. But I was there. I saw it. I touched it. Why are they lying? Jenny Wolfe demanded an explanation. She met with Detective Fuller again on January 10. "Detective, the divers found my daughter's body in a barrel. Why isn't that in the report?" Detective Fuller sighed. "Mrs. Wolfe, the divers were mistaken. In murky water, it's easy to misidentify objects. What they thought was a barrel was actually your daughter's jacket. But the divers are professionals. They know what they saw. I understand your frustration, but we've reviewed the evidence thoroughly. There was no barrel. Jenny left the meeting furious. She returned to the pond the next day, January 11th, determined to find the barrel herself. She brought Kevin Gorton and her son Michael with her. They searched the shoreline, combing through the mud and reeds. They searched the walking path, looking for any sign of where the barrel might have been moved. They searched the surrounding woods, checking behind trees and in ditches. The barrel was gone. Completely vanished. Jenny contacted Gordon Childress. "Gordon, where's the barrel?" Gordon was baffled. "We left it right there on the shore. Police told us they'd collect it as evidence. We assumed they took it. But police denied ever taking possession of a barrel. So where did it go?" To this day, no one has provided a satisfactory answer. Several theories have emerged over the years. Theory 1: the barrel was removed by the killer. According to this theory, Debbie's killer returned to the scene after police had left and removed the barrel to destroy evidence. But this seems unlikely for several reasons. First, the area was monitored by family members and volunteers in the days following the discovery. Jenny herself was there multiple times, searching for answers. It would have been nearly impossible for someone to remove a 55-gallon barrel without being seen. Second, the barrel would have been heavy and cumbersome, especially after being submerged in water. Moving it would have required a vehicle, which would have left tire tracks in the muddy access road. No such tracks were noted. Theory 2: police collected the barrel but misplaced it. This theory suggests that police did take the barrel as evidence but lost it due to poor evidence handling. In 1986, the Fayetteville Police Department's evidence storage was notoriously disorganized. Items were frequently mislabeled, misfiled, or lost entirely. It's possible that the barrel was logged into evidence and then misplaced during a storage room reorganization. But if this is true, it represents a catastrophic failure of protocol. A barrel containing a body is not something you misplace. It's not a small piece of evidence that can slip through the cracks. Theory 3: the barrel was deliberately destroyed. This is the most disturbing theory, and the one Jenny Wolfe came to believe. According to this theory, the barrel was deliberately removed and destroyed to cover up something in the investigation. But what? And why? Some have speculated that the barrel could have contained trace evidence linking it to a specific location or person. If police had tested the barrel for fingerprints, soil samples, paint chips, or other forensic markers, they might have identified Debbie's killer. The inside of the barrel could have contained hair, fibers, or biological material. The outside could have had fingerprints or tool marks. By allowing the barrel to disappear, or by deliberately destroying it, police lost that opportunity. Or did they want to lose it? Jenny Wolfe would spend years fighting for answers about the barrel. She hired attorneys to file public records requests. She filed complaints with the police department's Internal Affairs Division. She contacted state investigators, hoping they'd reopen the case. Nothing came of it. The official position remained: there was no barrel. But Gordon Childress still has his photographs. And those photographs prove, beyond any doubt, that the barrel existed. In one image, taken from about 10 feet away, the barrel is clearly visible on the muddy shore. It's dark blue or black, lying on its side, with Debbie's red shirt visible through the opening. In another image, Gordon and Tom are crouched beside the barrel, their hands on its surface, as they prepare to extract Debbie's body. These photos have been examined by forensic experts, who confirm they haven't been altered or manipulated. The barrel existed. And its disappearance would haunt this case forever. When Jenny Wolfe examined her daughter's body at the funeral home before the funeral, she immediately noticed something wrong with the clothing. The red shirt Debbie was wearing when she was found didn't belong to her. Jenny had never seen it before. It was a simple, crewneck shirt, the kind you might buy at any department store, Walmart, Kmart, J.C. Penney. But it wasn't in Debbie's closet. It wasn't in her laundry hamper. It wasn't hers. Jenny had been to Debbie's cabin countless times over the 3 years she'd lived there. She'd helped her daughter organize her closet, fold laundry, pack for trips. She knew Debbie's wardrobe intimately. This shirt was not part of it. The blue jeans were also problematic. They were at least 2 sizes too large. Debbie was petite, size 4 or 6 at most. These jeans were size 10 or 12. Jenny held them up against her own frame, measuring. The waist was inches too wide. The inseam was too long. There was no way these fit Debbie. And they'd been cinched with a belt, a cheap, brown leather belt that also didn't belong to Debbie. Debbie owned 2 belts, one black, one navy, neither of which matched this one. The bra was the most glaring discrepancy. Debbie wore a size 34B. Jenny knew this because she'd bought Debbie bras as gifts before. The bra Debbie was found in was a size 38D. 3 sizes too large in the band, 2 cup sizes too large. Jenny examined the tag, reading it twice to make sure she wasn't mistaken. 38D. No question. And then there were the shoes. Debbie wore a size 7. The sneakers on her feet were size 10. Jenny could fit her entire hand inside the shoe alongside Debbie's foot, with room to spare. These weren't shoes that were slightly too big, the kind you might buy with the intention of wearing thick socks. These were massively oversized, comically large on Debbie's small feet. When Jenny brought this to the attention of the funeral director, Mr. William McLaughlin, he seemed surprised. He examined the clothing himself and agreed that the sizes seemed wrong. Perhaps the medical examiner's office made a mistake? Perhaps they mixed up the belongings of 2 deceased individuals? Jenny immediately called the medical examiner's office. She spoke to Dr. Vinson himself. "Doctor, I'm looking at my daughter's body. The clothes she's wearing don't fit her. They're not hers." Dr. Vinson pulled Debbie's file. "According to my notes, those are the clothes she was wearing when she was recovered from the pond." "I understand that, but they're not her clothes. They don't fit. Mrs. Wolfe, I can assure you, these are the clothes your daughter was wearing. They were documented and photographed during the autopsy." Jenny hung up, frustrated. She decided to bring the issue to Detective Fuller. On January 12, she met with him at the police station. She brought the jeans, the shirt, and the bra from the funeral home. She laid them out on Detective Fuller's desk. "Detective, look at these. My daughter was a size 4. These are a size 10. This bra is a size 38D. She wore a 34B. These are not her clothes." Detective Fuller examined the items. "Mrs. Wolfe, perhaps your daughter borrowed these clothes from a friend. Perhaps she bought them recently and hadn't had a chance to return them." Jenny found this explanation absurd. Why would Debbie be wearing clothes that were 3 sizes too large? That doesn't make any sense. People wear oversized clothes all the time. Maybe she was doing laundry and these were all she had clean. Jenny wanted to scream. My daughter was meticulous. She would never leave the house in clothes that didn't fit. But Detective Fuller wouldn't budge. He insisted that the clothes must have been Debbie's and refused to investigate further. The implications of the clothing discrepancy are chilling. If Debbie wasn't wearing these clothes when she died, that means someone redressed her body. But why? One possibility is that Debbie's original clothes were damaged or stained in a way that would have pointed to foul play. Perhaps there was blood from a head wound or a stab wound. Perhaps there was evidence of a struggle, ripped fabric, torn buttons. Perhaps there was biological evidence, semen, saliva, or other fluids. By redressing her in clean, anonymous clothes, the killer hoped to obscure the manner of death. Another possibility is that the redressing was an attempt to stage an accident. If Debbie was found wearing ill-fitting clothes, it might suggest she'd been in a hurry, thrown on whatever was available, and accidentally fallen into the pond. But this theory falls apart when you consider the effort required. Someone would have had to strip Debbie's body completely. They would have had to remove her uniform, the long-sleeved white shirt and navy pants she'd been wearing when she left work. They would have had to find replacement clothing, the red shirt, the oversized jeans, the too large bra, the massive sneakers. They would have had to carefully redress her, ensuring everything was in place. That's not something you do in a panic. That's deliberate. Calculated. Methodical. And then there's the question of where these clothes came from. If they didn't belong to Debbie, whose were they? Did the killer bring them to the scene? Had he planned this in advance? Or did he take them from someone else, a girlfriend, a sister, a female friend? Police never investigated this angle. They simply insisted the clothes were Debbie's and refused to consider any alternative. Jenny even hired a private investigator in March of 1986 to look into the clothing. The investigator, a retired police detective named Raymond Walsh, confirmed that the sizes were indeed wrong and that none of the items could be traced back to Debbie. He checked with Debbie's friends, her co-workers, her family members. No one recognized the red shirt. No one had ever seen Debbie wear clothes that large. Walsh wrote a detailed report, which Jenny submitted to the police department. It was filed away and ignored. The mystery of the clothes, like so many aspects of this case, would remain unsolved. For over a decade, the case of Debbie Wolfe remained stagnant. Police had closed it as an accidental drowning. Jenny Wolfe refused to accept this, but her options were limited. She didn't have the resources to mount her own investigation. She didn't have access to forensic experts or advanced technology. All she had was her certainty that her daughter was murdered. And her determination to find out who did it. Then, in 1998, something happened that reignited the investigation. Dr. Maurice Godwin, a renowned forensic psychologist and cold case investigator, took an interest in Debbie's case. Dr. Godwin specialized in cases where official conclusions didn't match the evidence. He'd worked on high-profile investigations across the country, helping to solve murders that had gone cold for years or even decades. One of his graduate students had written a paper on mishandled death investigations in North Carolina. Debbie Wolfe's case was cited as an example. Intrigued, Dr. Godwin decided to look into it. He contacted Jenny Wolfe, who was thrilled to have someone with credibility and expertise take her concerns seriously. She provided him with everything she had: copies of the autopsy report, police reports, photographs, witness statements, her own notes and recollections. Dr. Godwin requested all available case materials from the Fayetteville Police Department. What he received was shockingly incomplete. Entire sections of the case file were missing. Photographs were absent. Witness statements had been misfiled or lost. Forensic reports were incomplete or heavily redacted. The evidence log showed items that should have been in storage, like the beer cans from Debbie's cabin, but when Dr. Godwin requested to examine them, he was told they'd been destroyed. But what Dr. Godwin did find was enough to convince him that Debbie's death was no accident. He focused on three key areas: the autopsy findings, the crime scene, and the timeline. First, the autopsy. Dr. Godwin consulted with multiple forensic pathologists about the drowning conclusion. He shared Dr. Vinson's report with experts at Duke University, the University of North Carolina, and the FBI's Forensic Division. All of them expressed skepticism. The lack of foam in the airways, the minimal water in the lungs, and the absence of typical drowning indicators suggested that Debbie had not died from drowning. In fact, several experts believed she might have already been dead, or very close to death, when she was placed in the water. This pointed to a different cause of death entirely. Perhaps strangulation. Perhaps blunt force trauma to the head. Perhaps suffocation. One pathologist, Dr. Elena Martinez from Duke, wrote in her assessment, "The findings in this case are inconsistent with a typical drowning. The minimal water in the lungs, the absence of foam, and the lack of petechiae suggest that the victim may have been unconscious or deceased prior to submersion. I would recommend exhumation and re-examination." But without exhuming the body and conducting a new autopsy, these theories couldn't be confirmed. Jenny Wolfe considered exhumation but ultimately decided against it. The thought of disturbing her daughter's resting place was too painful. She'd buried Debbie beside her husband, Jenny's late husband, in a peaceful cemetery on the outskirts of Fayetteville. The idea of digging up her daughter's grave, of putting her through another autopsy, felt like a violation. Dr. Godwin understood and didn't press the issue. Second, the crime scene. Dr. Godwin visited Debbie's cabin and the pond multiple times throughout 1998 and 1999. By then, the cabin had been sold to new owners, but the layout remained the same. Dr. Godwin walked the property, measuring distances, noting sight lines, documenting the terrain. He noted that the pond was not located on a direct route from Debbie's cabin to anywhere she would normally go. It wasn't on the way to work. It wasn't on the way to the grocery store or the post office. If Debbie had been trying to run away, as some had speculated based on her disarrayed cabin, why would she head toward the pond? It made no sense. The pond was nearly a mile and a half away, through woods and residential streets. There was no logical reason for Debbie to go there. Unless someone took her there. Dr. Godwin also examined the timeline. Debbie left work at 4 p.m. on December 26. She was seen arriving at her cabin around 4:30 or 4:45 p.m. Her car was parked haphazardly, suggesting she'd arrived home in a hurry, or someone else had parked it. The beer cans found in her cabin suggested that someone else had been there, likely shortly after she arrived home. But when did Debbie die? And when was her body placed in the pond? Dr. Godwin estimated, based on the autopsy findings and the condition of the body, that Debbie was continuar la historia desde donde se quedó el segundo documento, manteniendo el mismo tono narrativo y estilo. Underscore 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 underscore. Likely killed sometime between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. on December 26. Her body was probably moved to the pond later that night or early the next morning. This timeline contradicted the police theory of an accidental drowning. If Debbie had accidentally fallen into the pond, it would have happened while she was alive and active. But the evidence suggested she was killed elsewhere and her body transported. The pond was not a place Debbie would have gone voluntarily, especially not at night. Dr. Godwin conducted experiments to test various scenarios. Could Debbie have walked to the pond from her cabin? Theoretically, yes. But it would have taken approximately 30 minutes through dark woods and residential streets. Why would she do that? Could someone have forced her to walk there at gunpoint or knife point? Possible, but the German shepherds would have barked frantically if a stranger had threatened their owner. The most likely scenario: Debbie was killed at or near her cabin, then transported to the pond in a vehicle. The light-colored Suburban that Carol Jenkins saw near the pond around 8:30 p.m. fits this timeline perfectly. Third, Dr. Godwin focused on victimology. Who was Debbie Wolfe, and why would someone want to kill her? Debbie was a kind, well-liked woman with no known enemies. She wasn't involved in drugs or criminal activity. She had no significant debts or legal troubles. She wasn't involved in any romantic triangles or disputes. The only area of her life that raised red flags was her work with the hospital volunteers. Specifically, the two men who had shown inappropriate interest in her. Dr. Godwin tracked down both men. Volunteer A was living in Richmond, Virginia, working at a hospital there. Dr. Godwin contacted him by phone, identifying himself as a forensic psychologist investigating Debbie Wolfe's death. Volunteer A immediately became defensive. "I already talked to the police. I had nothing to do with her death. I don't have to talk to you." Dr. Godwin tried to keep the conversation friendly. "I understand this is difficult. I'm just trying to understand what happened. You knew Debbie. You worked with her. Can you tell me what she was like?" There was a long pause. She was nice. Professional. That's all I have to say." "Did you ever visit her at her home?" "No. Never. I don't know where she lived." "But you called her at home, didn't you?" Another pause. Maybe once or twice. I don't remember. This was years ago. Did you feel rejected by Debbie when she turned down your romantic advances?" "I don't have to answer these questions. Don't call me again." Volunteer A hung up. Dr. Godwin made several more attempts to reach him, but Volunteer A refused to answer. Volunteer B, however, agreed to speak. He was living in Charleston, South Carolina, working as a hospital administrator. Dr. Godwin flew to Charleston to meet with him in person in the fall of 1999. They met at a coffee shop near Volunteer B's office. Volunteer B was in his late 40s, well-dressed, professional. He seemed genuinely willing to help. "I've thought about Debbie over the years," he said. "What happened to her was terrible. If there's anything I can do to help solve it, I will." Dr. Godwin asked about his relationship with Debbie. "We were friends. We'd have coffee sometimes at the hospital. We talked about books, movies, normal stuff." "Did you have romantic feelings for her?" Volunteer B hesitated. Yes. I did. I asked her out once, and she said no. I accepted that and we stayed friends." "How did you feel when she rejected you?" "Disappointed, but not angry. She had every right to say no." Dr. Godwin asked about December 26, 1985. "I was at my aunt's house in Hope Mills. Family dinner. I was there from about 5 until late, maybe 11. Can anyone confirm the exact times?" "My aunt, my cousins. They were all there. But as the conversation continued, Volunteer B made several statements that struck Dr. Godwin as odd. He referred to Debbie in the present tense multiple times. Debbie is such a caring person. She really loves what she does. When Dr. Godwin gently corrected him, "You mean she was," Volunteer B seemed flustered. "Right, yes. Was. Sorry." He also became noticeably anxious when discussing the investigation. His hands shook slightly. He avoided eye contact. When Dr. Godwin asked if he'd be willing to take a polygraph test now, years later, to clear his name definitively, Volunteer B refused. "I don't think that's necessary. I told the police everything I know back then. But it would help eliminate you as a suspect entirely." "I'm not a suspect. The police ruled her death an accident." "But what if it wasn't an accident?" Volunteer B stood up abruptly. "I need to get back to work. I've told you everything I know." He left the coffee shop without saying goodbye. Dr. Godwin sat there for a long time, replaying the conversation in his mind. Volunteer B's behavior was suspicious, but it wasn't proof of anything. People get nervous when discussing murders, even if they're innocent. The use of present tense could be explained by the fact that Debbie's memory was very much alive for him. Still, Dr. Godwin couldn't shake the feeling that Volunteer B knew more than he was saying. Dr. Godwin compiled his findings into a comprehensive report spanning over 200 pages. His conclusion: Debbie Wolfe was murdered, and the investigation had been botched from the beginning. He identified multiple failures in the original investigation. Failure to properly secure and process the crime scene at Debbie's cabin. Failure to collect and preserve critical evidence, including the beer cans and the barrel. Failure to thoroughly investigate the two volunteers who had shown inappropriate interest in Debbie. Failure to follow up on witness statements, including the sighting of the suspicious vehicle near the pond. Failure to properly interpret the autopsy findings, which were inconsistent with accidental drowning. Dr. Godwin recommended that the case be reopened and that both volunteers be thoroughly re-investigated. He suggested that if the vaginal swab still existed, it should be tested using modern DNA technology. He proposed bringing in cadaver dogs to search Debbie's former property for any additional evidence. He even offered to work on the case pro bono, donating his time and expertise. Jenny Wolfe was overjoyed when she read Dr. Godwin's report. Finally, someone with credentials and authority was saying what she'd known all along: Debbie was murdered. In early 2000, Jenny presented Dr. Godwin's report to the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office. She met with Sheriff Earl Butler and Detective Raymond Fuller, who was still working in the department. She laid the report on the sheriff's desk. "This is 200 pages of evidence that proves my daughter was murdered. I'm asking you to reopen this case." Sheriff Butler flipped through the report, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Wolfe, I appreciate your persistence. But this case was thoroughly investigated in 1986. The conclusion was accidental drowning. Did you read the report? Dr. Godwin found dozens of inconsistencies. Dr. Godwin is a psychologist, not a police officer. He doesn't understand the realities of police work. He consulted with forensic pathologists. They all agree the autopsy findings don't support drowning." Sheriff Butler sighed. "Mrs. Wolfe, I understand this is painful. But we cannot reopen this case. Too much time has passed. Evidence has been lost. Witnesses' memories have faded. Then find new evidence. Interview the volunteers again. Do something. We simply don't have the resources. I'm sorry. Jenny left the meeting in tears. She'd been so hopeful, so certain that Dr. Godwin's report would change everything. But once again, she'd hit a wall. Dr. Godwin tried other avenues. He contacted the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, hoping they'd take over the case. They reviewed his report but declined to get involved, citing jurisdictional issues. He contacted the FBI, arguing that Debbie's death might be connected to her work at a federal facility, the VA hospital. They also declined, stating there was no evidence of a federal crime. Dr. Godwin even reached out to national media, hoping to generate public pressure. He pitched the story to Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted, and several other crime programs. None were interested. The case was too old, they said. There were no clear suspects. It wouldn't make compelling television. By 2001, Dr. Godwin had exhausted his options. He told Jenny he'd done everything he could. "I believe your daughter was murdered," he said. "I believe the investigation was a travesty. But without cooperation from law enforcement, there's nothing more I can do." Jenny thanked him for his efforts. She knew he'd tried his best. But she also knew the fight wasn't over. In 2006, 20 years after Debbie's death, another shocking revelation came to light. A former evidence clerk at the Fayetteville Police Department, a woman named Sandra Mills, came forward with disturbing information. Sandra had worked in the evidence room from 1990 to 2005. In early 2006, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Knowing she had limited time left, she felt compelled to clear her conscience. She contacted Jenny Wolfe directly, asking to meet in person. They met at a diner in Fayetteville on a cold February afternoon. Sandra was frail, her skin pale, her hands trembling. But her voice was steady. "Mrs. Wolfe, I need to tell you something about your daughter's case. Something that's been bothering me for years." Jenny leaned forward, her heart racing. "What is it?" "In 1998, we did a routine audit of old evidence. We were running out of space in the storage facility, so we were reviewing cases to see what could be disposed of." "Go on." "Your daughter's case came up. It was marked as closed, accidental drowning. According to policy, we could dispose of biological evidence from closed cases after 12 years. Jenny felt sick. "What did you dispose of?" Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't personally dispose of anything. But I saw the list. There was a vaginal swab from your daughter's autopsy. It was on the list of items to be destroyed." "Oh my God." I questioned it. I asked my supervisor why we were destroying evidence from a death investigation. He told me it was standard procedure for closed cases. I didn't push back. I should have, but I didn't. "So it was destroyed?" "I don't know for certain. The list said it was scheduled for destruction, but I left the department before I could confirm whether it actually happened." Jenny's hands were shaking. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm dying. And I can't die knowing I might have prevented justice for your daughter. I should have fought harder. I should have refused to let that evidence be destroyed." Sandra started crying. Jenny reached across the table and took her hand. "It's not your fault. You were following orders. But I knew it was wrong. I knew it." After Sandra left, Jenny immediately called Dr. Godwin. He helped her file a formal inquiry with the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office. They demanded to know the status of the vaginal swab collected during Debbie's autopsy. The sheriff's office conducted an internal search. Weeks passed with no response. Finally, in March 2006, Jenny received a letter. The letter confirmed Sandra's worst fears. The vaginal swab had been destroyed in 1999 during an evidence purge. The department apologized for the unfortunate error, but stated that it was done in accordance with policy at the time. Jenny was devastated. That sample could have identified Debbie's killer. With modern DNA technology, techniques that didn't exist in 1986, even a degraded sample could potentially yield a profile. That profile could be run through CODIS, the National DNA Database, which by 2006 contained millions of profiles from convicted offenders. If Debbie's killer had committed other crimes, if he'd been arrested and had his DNA collected, he could have been identified. But without the sample, that possibility was lost forever. Jenny filed a formal complaint against the police department. She demanded an investigation into how the sample had been lost. The department conducted an internal review. Their conclusion mirrored what Sandra had told Jenny: the sample had been destroyed during a purge of old evidence in the late 1990s. At that time, the department had been running out of storage space. They'd made the decision to dispose of biological evidence from cases that were closed and considered resolved. Debbie's case, officially ruled an accidental drowning, had been flagged for disposal. Some items were destroyed before anyone realized the mistake. The vaginal swab was among them. This explanation, while plausible, did little to ease Jenny's anger. Her daughter's case had been mishandled from day one. And now, even the potential for future justice had been eliminated. But the loss of the vaginal swab raised another disturbing question. If Debbie had been sexually assaulted, and the presence of semen strongly suggested she had, why was this not mentioned prominently in the original investigation? Why was it buried in the autopsy report and never followed up on? Jenny obtained a full copy of the autopsy report through a lawyer. She read it carefully, looking for any mention of sexual assault. On page 7, in a section labeled Genital Examination, Dr. Vinson had written: vaginal swab collected. Tested positive for presence of semen. No significant trauma to vaginal or anal areas noted. That was it. 2 sentences. No follow-up. No investigation. No attempt to identify whose semen it was. Jenny was furious. She contacted Detective Fuller, who was now retired but still living in Fayetteville. She confronted him at his home. Why didn't you investigate the sexual assault? Fuller seemed confused. What sexual assault? The semen. The autopsy found semen. That means my daughter was raped. Fuller shook his head. Mrs. Wolfe, the presence of semen doesn't automatically mean rape. Your daughter could have had consensual sex shortly before her death. Did you ask anyone if she was seeing someone? Did you investigate who the semen belonged to? Fuller hesitated. We asked around. Your daughter's friends said she wasn't seeing anyone seriously. So you assumed it was from someone she knew casually? It seemed like the most likely explanation. But you never tried to identify the person? Mrs. Wolfe, in 1986, DNA testing wasn't what it is today. We couldn't identify someone from a semen sample unless we already had a suspect to compare it to. So you did nothing? We did everything we could with the technology available at the time. Jenny didn't believe him. She believed the police had dismissed the semen as irrelevant because it complicated their accidental drowning narrative. If Debbie had been sexually assaulted, it would have been much harder to rule her death an accident. It would have required a full-scale homicide investigation. And for whatever reason, incompetence, laziness, or something more sinister, the police had chosen not to go down that road. The loss of the vaginal swab was a tragedy. But it was also a damning indictment of the Fayetteville Police Department's handling of the case. Even in 1986, that sample should have been treated as sacred. It should have been preserved indefinitely. Instead, it had been casually discarded, as if Debbie's life didn't matter. As if justice for her didn't matter. Jenny would never forgive them for that. As public interest in Debbie's case grew, thanks in part to Dr. Godwin's work and Jenny's tireless advocacy, new witnesses began to come forward. These were people who'd been in the area around the time of Debbie's death but had never been contacted by police. Or, in some cases, people who had tried to provide information but had been ignored. One such witness was Carol Jenkins, the woman who'd seen the suspicious vehicle near the pond. Carol didn't come forward until 2003, 18 years after the fact. She'd been living in Fayetteville in 1985 but had moved to Florida in 1987. She'd heard about Debbie's case over the years but had never realized her observation might be relevant. Then, in 2003, she happened to see a true crime documentary that featured unsolved North Carolina cases. Debbie's case was mentioned briefly. Carol recognized the name immediately. She remembered that night, December 26, 1985, walking her dog near the pond. She remembered the light-colored Suburban parked near the trailhead. She contacted the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office and gave a detailed statement. She described the vehicle, a Chevy Suburban or similar large SUV, light tan or beige in color, late 1970s or early 1980s model. The vehicle had been running, engine idling, but no one was inside. The time was approximately 8:30 p.m. Carol had thought it was odd at the time but hadn't thought to report it. After all, there was no law against parking near the pond. Detective Fuller, who was still active in 2003, interviewed Carol personally. He asked why she hadn't come forward sooner. Carol explained that she'd moved away and hadn't followed the case closely. She'd assumed the police had investigated thoroughly and didn't need her information. Detective Fuller thanked her for coming forward but privately dismissed her testimony as unreliable. Too much time had passed. Memories fade. How could she be certain about the date, the time, the vehicle? But Carol was certain. She remembered it was December 26 because it was the day after Christmas. She remembered the time because she'd been watching a specific TV show earlier that evening, The Twilight Zone marathon on Channel 11, and had taken her dog out during a commercial break around 8:20. She remembered the vehicle because it stood out. Most people didn't park at the pond after dark, especially in winter. Dr. Godwin, when he learned of Carol's testimony, was excited. This could be the break they needed. If they could identify who owned a light-colored Suburban in the Fayetteville area in 1985, they might identify the killer. But Detective Fuller refused to pursue it. There were probably hundreds of Suburbans in Fayetteville in 1985, he said. We can't track them all down. Dr. Godwin argued that they should at least check whether Volunteer A or Volunteer B owned or had access to such a vehicle. But Fuller refused. Those men were cleared years ago. We're not reopening that. Another witness, Thomas Ridley, came forward in 2008. Thomas had been 15 years old in 1985, living with his parents in a house that backed up to the wooded area near Debbie's cabin. On the night of December 26, around 9 or 9:30 p.m., Thomas had been in his bedroom doing homework. His window faced the woods. He heard shouting coming from the direction of Debbie's cabin. He couldn't make out the words, but he distinctly remembered a woman's voice, high-pitched and frantic, followed by a man's voice, deeper and aggressive. The woman was yelling something, maybe "no" or "stop." But he couldn't be sure. The shouting lasted for several minutes and then stopped abruptly. Thomas had mentioned it to his parents at the time. His father had looked out the window but didn't see anything. "Probably just neighbors having a fight," his father had said. "Stay out of it." When Debbie's body was found days later, Thomas wondered if what he'd heard was connected. But he was young, uncertain, and afraid of getting involved. His parents discouraged him from going to the police. "You don't know what you heard. Don't get mixed up in this." So Thomas stayed silent. For over 20 years, he carried that memory, wondering if he could have saved Debbie if he'd spoken up sooner. In 2008, after reading about the case online, Thomas decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He contacted the sheriff's office and gave a detailed statement. He provided the exact date and approximate time. He described what he'd heard: the woman's scream, the man's angry voice, the abrupt silence. Police interviewed him but expressed skepticism. How could he be certain about a memory from over 20 years ago? Thomas insisted the memory was vivid. "I've thought about it many times over the years. I know what I heard." But without corroboration, his testimony was deemed inconclusive. Dr. Godwin, however, found Thomas's account compelling. It fit the timeline perfectly. If Debbie was killed around 9 or 9:30 p.m., and her body was moved to the pond shortly after, that aligned with Carol Jenkins's sighting of the vehicle around 8:30. The killer could have arrived at Debbie's cabin around 8 p.m., argued with her, killed her around 9 or 9:30, and then transported her body to the pond. But police refused to connect the dots. A third witness, Patricia Moore, the nurse who'd overheard Volunteer A's threat, came forward again in 2007. Patricia had given a statement to police in January 1986, shortly after Debbie's death. She'd reported Volunteer A's threatening statement, "If I can't have her, nobody will." She'd given a formal statement, which was supposed to be documented in the case file. But when Dr. Godwin reviewed the file in 1998, Patricia's statement was nowhere to be found. It had vanished. Patricia was shocked when Dr. Godwin told her, "I gave that statement to an officer. He wrote it all down. I signed it." "Do you remember the officer's name?" "I think it was Fuller. Detective Fuller." Dr. Godwin contacted Detective Fuller about the missing statement. Fuller claimed he had no memory of interviewing Patricia Moore. "Are you sure you gave a statement? Maybe you spoke to someone informally but never filed an official report." Patricia was certain. "I sat in an interview room at the police station. I gave a formal statement. I signed a document. How can that just disappear?" Fuller had no answer. In 2007, Patricia agreed to be interviewed again by Dr. Godwin. She provided the same account she'd given in 1986. Volunteer A had made the threatening statement in mid-December, about 2 weeks before Debbie disappeared. He'd said it in the hospital hallway, loud enough for multiple people to hear. Patricia remembered his exact words, "If I can't have her, nobody will." She also remembered his demeanor, agitated, angry, irrational. Dr. Godwin asked if anyone else had witnessed the incident. Patricia mentioned another nurse, Lisa Henderson, who'd been standing nearby. Dr. Godwin tracked down Lisa Henderson. She'd left the VA hospital years ago and was now living in Georgia. When Dr. Godwin called her, she remembered the incident immediately. "Oh God, yes. I remember that. He was so angry. We all thought he was just blowing off steam, but after Debbie died, I wondered. Did you give a statement to police? No. No one ever asked me. Another witness who should have been interviewed but wasn't. Dr. Godwin compiled these testimonies, Carol Jenkins, Thomas Ridley, Patricia Moore, Lisa Henderson, into a supplemental report. He presented it to the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office in 2009. Once again, they declined to reopen the case. Their reasoning: too much time had passed, memories were unreliable, and there was no physical evidence linking anyone to the crime. Dr. Godwin was frustrated, but he understood the reality. Without cooperation from law enforcement, there was only so much he could do. But he made a promise to Jenny Wolfe: he would never stop trying. As long as she was alive, he would continue to investigate, continue to push for justice. Jenny was grateful, but she was also exhausted. She was now in her 70s, and her health was declining. The years of stress and frustration had taken their toll. In 2000, she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent surgery and chemotherapy, and the cancer went into remission. But in 2002, it returned. This time, it was more aggressive. Jenny knew she was running out of time. Underscore 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 underscore. For 16 years, Jenny Wolfe fought for justice for her daughter. From 1986 to 2002, she dedicated her life to finding answers. She contacted every law enforcement agency she could think of: local police, state police, the FBI. She hired private investigators, forensic experts, and attorneys. She gave interviews to newspapers, television programs, and radio shows. She attended town hall meetings, confronted politicians, and rallied community support. She never stopped believing that Debbie's killer could be found. But the fight took a devastating toll. Emotionally, Jenny was drained. She'd spent 16 years reliving her daughter's death over and over again. Every time she reviewed the case file, every time she looked at photographs from the scene, every time she spoke to a reporter, she was forced to confront the horror of what had happened. Physically, Jenny was exhausted. The stress had manifested in chronic health problems, high blood pressure, insomnia, migraines. The cancer diagnosis in 2000 was a crushing blow. But even during treatment, Jenny didn't stop fighting. She brought case files to chemotherapy appointments, reviewing witness statements while poison dripped into her veins. Financially, Jenny was nearly bankrupt. She'd spent tens of thousands of dollars on private investigators and legal fees. She'd taken out loans. She'd sold her house and moved into a small apartment. Every penny she had went toward finding justice for Debbie. Her other children, Michael and Karen, begged her to stop. "Mom, you're killing yourself over this. You need to let go." But Jenny couldn't let go. "Your sister was murdered. Someone has to fight for her. If I don't, who will?" In early 2002, the cancer returned with a vengeance. It had metastasized to Jenny's liver and lungs. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe a year. Jenny knew she was running out of time. She made one final push, reaching out to every media outlet she could find. She appeared on a local news program, WRAL-TV in Raleigh, in March 2002. The interview was heartbreaking. Jenny, visibly frail, her hair gone from chemotherapy, sat in front of the camera and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. My daughter Debbie was 28 years old when someone took her life. She was a nurse. She helped people. She didn't deserve what happened to her. If anyone knows anything at all, please come forward. Please help us find justice for Debbie. The interview aired on March 15, 2002. Jenny offered a reward of $5,000, nearly all the money she had left, for any tip that led to an arrest. The station received dozens of calls. Most were expressions of sympathy. A few were from people who claimed to have information but turned out to be dead ends or attention seekers. One call, however, stood out. It came from a woman who refused to give her name. She told the reporter, "I know who killed Debbie Wolfe. It was one of the volunteers from the hospital. Everyone knows it. The police just won't do anything about it." When pressed for more details, the woman hung up. The tip was passed along to the sheriff's office, but nothing came of it. As spring turned to summer, Jenny's condition deteriorated rapidly. By August, she was in hospice care. Dr. Godwin visited her regularly, bringing updates on the case. He was still trying, still pushing for the case to be reopened. But they both knew it was unlikely to happen in Jenny's lifetime. On one of his final visits, in late September, Jenny asked Dr. Godwin to make her a promise. "Promise me you won't let people forget Debbie. Promise me you'll keep fighting, even after I'm gone." Dr. Godwin, tears in his eyes, took Jenny's hand. "I promise. I'll never stop fighting for Debbie." Jenny smiled weakly. "Thank you." In the final months of her life, Jenny made peace with the fact that she might never see justice for Debbie. But she took comfort in knowing that she'd done everything she could. She'd fought harder than most people would have. She'd refused to accept the official story, even when everyone told her she was wrong. She'd kept Debbie's memory alive. On October 12, 2002, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Jenny Wolfe passed away peacefully. She was 68 years old. At her funeral 2 days later, friends and family spoke about her unwavering love for Debbie and her tireless fight for truth. One family member, Jenny's niece Rebecca, read a statement Jenny had written shortly before her death. "I don't know if I'll ever know what happened to my daughter. But I know this: Debbie was loved. She mattered. And someone, somewhere, knows the truth. I pray that one day, they'll have the courage to speak. I pray that Debbie will finally get the justice she deserves. Even if I'm not here to see it, I pray that someone will continue this fight." Debbie's life had meaning. Her death should have meaning too. Don't let her be forgotten. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Jenny was buried beside Debbie in Lafayette Memorial Park, a cemetery on the outskirts of Fayetteville. Her headstone, chosen by her children, reads, "Jenny Marie Wolfe. Beloved mother, grandmother, fighter. She never stopped fighting for her daughter." 1934 to 2002. Today, nearly 40 years after Debbie Wolfe's death, her case remains officially unsolved. The Cumberland County Sheriff's Office maintains that Debbie's death was an accidental drowning. They have not reopened the investigation, and they have no plans to do so. Sheriff Ennis Wright, who took office in 2019, has stated publicly that he's reviewed the case and sees no reason to question the original conclusion. "We trust the judgment of the investigators who worked this case in 1986, Wright said in a 2021 interview. "Without new evidence, there's no basis for reopening it." But advocates for Debbie's case, including Dr. Maurice Godwin and members of the Wolfe family, disagree. They point to the numerous inconsistencies, the lost evidence, and the suspicious circumstances. They argue that Debbie's death deserves a fresh look, especially given advances in forensic technology. In recent years, DNA phenotyping, genetic genealogy, and advanced forensic analysis have solved cases that were once thought impossible. The Golden State Killer, identified in 2018 through genetic genealogy, is perhaps the most famous example. If the vaginal swab from Debbie's autopsy still existed, it could potentially be tested using these new methods. Even a partial DNA profile could be run through genealogy databases like GEDmatch, potentially identifying the killer through familial matches. But the sample is gone. And without it, the chances of a DNA breakthrough are slim. However, not all hope is lost. In 2019, a group of independent cold case investigators from the nonprofit organization Justice for All expressed interest in reviewing Debbie's case. The organization, founded by retired law enforcement officers and forensic experts, specializes in reopening cold cases that have been mishandled or overlooked. They reached out to the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, requesting access to the case files. Their request was denied. The sheriff's office stated that the case was closed and there was no active investigation. Without an active investigation, the files could not be released to outside parties. Justice for All appealed the decision, citing North Carolina's public records laws. The case went to court in 2020. The judge ruled in favor of the sheriff's office, stating that investigative files from closed cases were exempt from public disclosure. Justice for All's attorney, Marcus Webb, was frustrated by the decision. This is exactly the kind of case that deserves a fresh look. But the system is designed to protect itself, not to seek truth. This catch-22 has frustrated advocates for decades. The case can't be reopened without new evidence, but new evidence can't be found without access to the case files. In 2021, a Change.org petition was started by Debbie's niece, Rebecca Wolfe Harrison. The petition called for the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office to reopen Debbie's case and allow independent experts to review the evidence. It gathered over 10,000 signatures within 6 months. Rebecca presented the petition to Sheriff Wright in September 2021, accompanied by Dr. Godwin and several family members. Sheriff Wright met with them for 30 minutes. He listened politely but made no commitments. "I appreciate your passion for this case," he said. "But we have limited resources and many active cases that require our attention. I cannot justify dedicating resources to a 40-year-old closed case without compelling new evidence." But there is compelling evidence. Rebecca argued. The lost barrel, the wrong clothes, the sexual assault that was never investigated. Those issues were addressed in the original investigation. I've reviewed the file personally. I see no reason to question the conclusions reached by my predecessors. The meeting ended with no progress. The petition, despite its thousands of signatures, resulted in no action. As of 2025, the case remains closed. But the story of Debbie Wolfe has not been forgotten. True crime enthusiasts, podcasters, and internet sleuths have kept her memory alive. Online forums dedicated to unsolved cases frequently discuss Debbie's death, analyzing the evidence and debating the theories. Reddit's r/unresolved mysteries has multiple threads about Debbie's case, with thousands of comments dissecting every detail. Some amateur investigators have conducted their own research, tracking down former witnesses and attempting to locate the two volunteers. Volunteer A has never been publicly identified by name, due to legal concerns about defamation. But those deeply familiar with the case know who he is. According to internet researchers, he's now in his 70s, living quietly in Virginia. He's retired from hospital work and has kept a low profile for decades. Several amateur sleuths have attempted to contact him, but he refuses to engage. One investigator managed to reach him by phone in 2018. When asked about Debbie Wolfe, he hung up immediately and changed his number shortly after. Volunteer B has been similarly elusive. He's reportedly living in South Carolina, still working in healthcare administration. Like Volunteer A, he refuses to discuss Debbie's case. In 2020, a podcaster from the true crime show, Cold Case Files Revisited, attempted to interview him. Volunteer B's attorney sent a cease and desist letter, threatening legal action if the harassment continued. The podcast episode was never produced. Whether either man is guilty remains unknown. But the suspicion will follow them for the rest of their lives. Some online investigators have proposed alternative theories. One theory suggests that Debbie's killer might have been a transient, someone passing through Fayetteville who encountered Debbie by chance. This theory would explain why no clear suspect has ever emerged from her social circle. But it doesn't explain the beer cans in Debbie's cabin, which suggests she knew her attacker and let him inside. It also doesn't explain the deliberate staging of the scene, the wrong clothes, the barrel, the disposal in the pond. These details suggest someone who knew Debbie, who knew her home, who had time to plan. Another theory, popular on conspiracy-focused forums, suggests that Debbie's death was connected to something she witnessed at the VA hospital. Perhaps she saw illegal activity, drug theft, patient abuse, fraud. Perhaps she threatened to report it, and someone silenced her. But there's no evidence to support this theory. Debbie's co-workers have consistently described her as professional and well-liked, with no indication she was involved in any workplace conflicts beyond the unwanted attention from volunteers. A third theory, perhaps the darkest, suggests that Debbie was the victim of a serial killer who was never caught. Fayetteville in the 1980s had several unsolved murders of young women. In 1983, a nurse named Patricia Simmons was found strangled in her apartment. In 1987, a teacher named Mary Beth Reynolds disappeared and was never found. In 1989, a waitress named Cheryl Hodges was found dead in a wooded area, her death ruled accidental despite suspicious circumstances. Some researchers have suggested these cases might be connected. But law enforcement has never formally linked them, and the evidence is circumstantial at best. The most likely scenario, based on all available evidence, remains the original theory: Debbie was murdered by someone she knew, most likely one of the two volunteers who had shown inappropriate interest in her. That person killed her in a moment of rage, possibly after she rejected him one final time. He then tried to stage the scene to make it look like an accident, redressing her body and submerging it in a barrel in the pond. But his plan was flawed. The barrel was discovered. The wrong clothes were noticed. The evidence pointed to murder. Yet somehow, through a combination of police incompetence and missing evidence, he got away with it. And for nearly 40 years, he's lived as a free man. Underscore 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 underscore. Unanswered questions. The death of Debbie Wolfe leaves us with more questions than answers. What really happened on the night of December 26, 1985? The timeline suggests Debbie arrived home around 4:45 p.m. At some point that evening, likely between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m., someone came to her cabin. Was it Volunteer A? Volunteer B? Someone else entirely? Did Debbie let this person inside willingly, or did he force his way in? The beer cans suggest she knew her visitor and felt comfortable enough to let him in. But beer wasn't Debbie's drink. Did her killer bring the beer? Did he drink alone while Debbie watched uncomfortably? What led to her death? Did she reject him romantically one final time, triggering a violent rage? Did she threaten to report his behavior to authorities? Did he make an advance that she resisted, leading to a physical struggle? The defensive wounds on her fingers suggest she fought back. But the lack of significant trauma to her head or body suggests she was overpowered quickly. How did she die? The autopsy ruled drowning, but the evidence doesn't support this. The minimal water in her lungs, the absence of foam, the lack of typical drowning indicators, all suggest she was already dead or dying when placed in the water. Was she strangled? Suffocated? Did she suffer a fatal head injury that wasn't detected during the autopsy? Without exhumation and re-examination, we may never know. Who was in Debbie's cabin drinking those beers? Police never tested the cans for fingerprints or DNA. Those cans could have definitively identified Debbie's killer. Instead, they were photographed and then disposed of when the cabin was cleaned out. Why was Debbie's body found in a barrel that police claim never existed? Multiple witnesses saw it. Photographs document it. Drag marks on the pond floor prove something heavy was placed there. Yet the official record denies its existence. Where did the barrel go? Did police take it and lose it? Did the killer return to remove it? Did someone deliberately destroy it to hide evidence? This question has haunted investigators for 40 years. Whose clothes was Debbie wearing when she was found? The red shirt she'd never owned. The jeans 3 sizes too large. The bra that didn't fit. The massive sneakers. Someone redressed her body, but why? Where did these clothes come from? Did the killer bring them to the scene? Were they taken from another victim? And where is the uniform Debbie was wearing when she left work, the shirt with the distinctive coffee stain? That uniform vanished from the crime scene and was never recovered. What happened to the vaginal swab? The presence of semen strongly suggests Debbie was sexually assaulted before her death. That sample should have been preserved as sacred evidence. Instead, it was carelessly destroyed during an evidence purge. Who made that decision? Could it have been prevented? And most importantly, whose DNA was on that sample? If we had it today, we could potentially solve this case through genetic genealogy. But it's gone forever. Why did police ignore the threatening statements made by Volunteer A? Multiple witnesses heard him say, "If I can't have her, nobody will." He'd called Debbie at home repeatedly. He'd been warned to stay away from her. He had no alibi for the night of her death. Yet he was interviewed once and then cleared. Why? Was it incompetence? Laziness? Or something more sinister? Why did Volunteer B's behavior change in the days before Debbie's disappearance? He was asking about her schedule. He was watching her from a distance. His alibi was weak, family members who couldn't remember exact times. He drove a light-colored Suburban, matching the vehicle seen near the pond. Yet he too was interviewed once and then cleared. Why wasn't he investigated more thoroughly? What about the witness testimonies that were lost or ignored? Patricia Moore's statement about Volunteer A's threat, gone from the files. Thomas Ridley's account of hearing screaming, dismissed as unreliable. Carol Jenkins's sighting of the suspicious vehicle, never followed up. How many other witnesses were overlooked? How many other pieces of evidence were lost or destroyed? And the biggest question of all, who killed Debbie Wolfe? After nearly 40 years, we still don't know. But the evidence points to someone she knew. Someone who had access to her cabin. Someone who felt entitled to her attention and affection. Someone who couldn't accept rejection. Someone who, in a moment of rage or calculation, took her life. And someone who has lived as a free man ever since. Underscore 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 underscore. The legacy of Debbie Wolfe. Debbie Wolfe's case has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of botched investigations. It's studied in law enforcement academies as an example of what not to do. Crime scene contamination. Lost evidence. Ignored witnesses. Premature conclusions. The Fayetteville Police Department's handling of this case represents a systemic failure at every level. But beyond the investigative failures, Debbie's case has sparked important conversations about violence against women, particularly in the workplace. Debbie was being harassed by someone she supervised. She reported it to her superiors, but not enough was done to protect her. Her story has inspired policy changes at VA hospitals and other healthcare facilities across the country. Many now have stricter protocols for screening volunteers and immediate termination policies for harassment. Debbie's case has also highlighted the importance of preserving evidence in closed cases. The destruction of the vaginal swab led to reforms in evidence retention policies in North Carolina. State law now requires that biological evidence from unsolved homicides, and suspicious deaths that might be homicides, be preserved indefinitely. The law, informally known as Debbie's Law by advocates, was passed in 2010. It came too late for Debbie, but it may help solve future cases. Dr. Maurice Godwin, now in his 70s, continues to work on Debbie's case. He's written extensively about it in academic journals and has featured it in several of his books on cold case investigation. He's trained hundreds of law enforcement officers using Debbie's case as a teaching tool. Every investigator should study the Debbie Wolfe case, Dr. Godwin has said. Not because it's unique, but because it's not. These mistakes happen all the time. Evidence gets lost. Witnesses get overlooked. Cases get closed prematurely. If we don't learn from these failures, we're doomed to repeat them. Debbie's family continues to fight for justice. Her niece, Rebecca Wolfe Harrison, has become the primary advocate since Jenny's death. Rebecca was only 10 years old when Debbie died, but she remembers her aunt vividly, the kind nurse who always had candy in her pockets and who let Rebecca play with her dogs when she visited. Rebecca has dedicated significant time and resources to keeping Debbie's case in the public eye. She maintains a Facebook page called Justice for Debbie Wolfe with over 15,000 followers. She regularly posts updates, shares new information, and coordinates with true crime investigators. She's appeared on numerous podcasts and YouTube channels, telling Debbie's story to new audiences. In 2023, Rebecca organized a memorial walk in Fayetteville on the anniversary of Debbie's death. Over 200 people attended, walking from Debbie's former cabin, now owned by others, to the pond where her body was found. The walk ended with a candlelight vigil and a moment of silence. Rebecca gave a speech that brought many to tears. "My Aunt Debbie was 28 years old when someone stole her future. She wanted to get married someday. She wanted to have children. She wanted to grow old with her dogs by her side. She wanted simple things, a happy life, a peaceful life. Someone took that away from her. And for 40 years, that person has walked free. That's not justice. That's not acceptable. We're here today to say we haven't forgotten Debbie. We will never forget her. And we will never stop fighting for her. The vigil was covered by local media, reigniting public interest in the case. The sheriff's office received dozens of calls asking about the investigation. But once again, they declined to reopen the case. Debbie's grave has become a pilgrimage site for true crime enthusiasts. Visitors leave flowers, notes, and small tokens, teddy bears, crosses, angel figurines. Her headstone, which simply reads Deborah and Wolfe, 1957 to 1986, beloved daughter, nurse, friend, is always adorned with fresh flowers. Rebecca visits monthly to clean the grave and remove items that have weathered. I want people to know someone still cares, Rebecca says. Debbie's not just a cold case. She was a real person. She mattered. She still matters. Underscore 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 underscore. Closing, a call for justice. As we close this investigation into the death of Debbie Wolfe, one thing is abundantly clear: this case is far from over. Yes, officially, it's closed. Yes, police maintain it was an accidental drowning. But the truth is obvious to anyone who examines the evidence objectively. Debbie Wolfe was murdered. She was murdered by someone she knew. She was murdered by someone who felt entitled to her attention and affection. She was murdered by someone who couldn't accept rejection. And that person has evaded justice for nearly 40 years. Perhaps he's lived with guilt all these years. Perhaps he wakes up in the middle of the night, haunted by what he did. Perhaps he sees Debbie's face in his dreams, her eyes closed peacefully in death, and feels the weight of his actions. Or perhaps he's rationalized it. Perhaps he's told himself it was an accident, that he didn't mean to kill her. Perhaps he's convinced himself that she'd made him do it by rejecting him. Perhaps he's moved on completely, living a normal life, secure in the knowledge that he'll never be caught. But here's what he doesn't know. Cold cases are never truly cold. Advances in technology continue to solve decades-old murders. Witnesses continue to come forward, even after many years. Deathbed confessions happen. DNA databases expand. And sometimes, the most unexpected evidence surfaces at the most unexpected time. The Golden State Killer evaded capture for 44 years before genetic genealogy identified him. The Boston Strangler's identity was confirmed 60 years after his crimes through DNA analysis. The Zodiac Killer, who terrorized California in the 1960s and 70s, was potentially identified in 2021 through investigative genetic genealogy. These cases prove that time is not the ally of killers. It's the ally of justice. Every year that passes brings new technology, new methods, new possibilities. Debbie's killer may feel safe now. But he shouldn't. Because somewhere, someone knows something. Maybe it's a family member who's heard suspicious comments over the years. Maybe it's a friend who noticed strange behavior in late December 1985. Maybe it's a former colleague who saw something at the hospital that didn't seem important at the time. Or maybe it's the killer himself, finally ready to unburden his conscience. If you have any information about the death of Debbie Wolfe, please come forward. Even if you think it's insignificant, even if you're not sure it's relevant, even if you're afraid of the consequences, please speak up. Contact the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office at 910-323-1500. Or submit an anonymous tip through their website at www.cumberlandcountync.gov/crimetips. You can also contact the Justice for Debbie Wolfe Facebook page, where Rebecca Wolfe Harrison can connect you with advocates and investigators. Your tip could be the key to finally solving this case. Your information could bring justice to a woman who's been waiting for it for nearly 40 years. Debbie Wolfe was 28 years old when she died. She was a registered nurse who dedicated her life to helping others. She was a daughter who loved her mother fiercely. She was a dog lover who rescued German shepherds and gave them a home. She was a friend who was always there when people needed her. She was a meticulous, punctual, reliable person who never caused problems for anyone. She was kind. She was compassionate. She was professional. She had her whole life ahead of her. She wanted simple things, a happy life, maybe a family someday, peaceful evenings in her cabin with her dogs. And someone took that away from her. Someone looked at this kind, caring woman and decided his desires were more important than her life. Someone killed her, staged her death as an accident, and walked away. Debbie deserves justice. Her mother, Jenny, who spent 16 years fighting for her daughter before dying of cancer, deserves peace. Her family, who've carried this burden for nearly 4 decades, deserve answers. And her killer deserves to be held accountable. This is Cold Case Dossier, file number 001. The Death of Debbie Wolfe. Unsolved. Unforgotten. And still waiting for justice. If you're out there, if you know something, if you were involved, do the right thing. Come forward. Tell the truth. Let Debbie finally rest in peace. And let justice, delayed for far too long, finally be served. YouTube outro, Cold Case Dossier. Musica de fondo se suaviza, tono más directo y personal. Narrator. The case of Debbie Wolfe remains one of the most frustrating unsolved mysteries in North Carolina history. A young woman, murdered in her prime. Evidence lost or destroyed. A killer who's never been held accountable. But cases like this don't stay cold forever. They're solved when people refuse to forget. When communities demand justice. And when new voices join the conversation. If this case resonated with you, if you believe Debbie deserves justice, help us keep her story alive. Hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this video with more people who might have information or connections to Fayetteville in 1985. Subscribe to Cold Case Dossier and turn on notifications so you never miss when we investigate another forgotten case. These stories need to be told. These victims need to be remembered. Drop a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from? Are you from North Carolina? Did you live in Fayetteville in the 1980s? Do you have any theories about what happened to Debbie? Your engagement keeps these cases in the public eye. And you never know, the right person might see this video and finally come forward with the information that solves it. Share this video with true crime communities, with anyone who might have connections to this case. Every share could be the one that leads to a breakthrough. Next week on Cold Case Dossier, we'll be investigating another case that law enforcement got wrong. Another family still searching for answers. Another killer who thought they got away with it. Until then, remember, justice delayed is not justice denied. It's just justice waiting for its moment. For Debbie Wolfe. For Jenny Wolfe. For every victim still waiting. This is Cold Case Dossier. Stay curious. Stay vigilant. And never stop demanding truth.